Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jack Douglas. Old Glory flies atop the tallest flagpole I've ever seen, and below it are the flags of Polynesia, of New Zealand, Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti, and the state of Hawaii. This is the Polynesian Cultural Center, about 40 miles from Honolulu, a center that features one of the most unusual and colorful villages on the face of the earth. Here in this one village, the 6 major Polynesian cultures have merged to form an unforgettable tourist attraction. Listen.
I think the Polynesian Center is one thing that everyone should see when they come to Hawaii.
We're from Denver, Colorado. I find that the center is a photographer's paradise.
I think it's wonderful to have all the things together in one spot.
I'm from Sydney, Australia. Thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon's outing here.
We're from Yakima County, Washington, and we really enjoyed this place and had a very nice time.
I'm from Livermore, California. I think this is a wonderful cultural center. You could spend as much time as you want and not see it all. It's beautiful.
I'm from Terre Haute, Indiana, and I think it is beautiful here.
I'm from Albuquerque. I think you can spend an hour or a day here and really learn something about Polynesia. I think it's the most authentic thing of this sort I've ever seen.
This is your vacation to Polynesia in America. Very few visitors to Honolulu and Hawaii can resist the temptation to go back again. But now, in addition to the island's famous attractions, something new and wonderful awaits us. We take a bus from Honolulu and cross the Pali mountain range to reach the opposite side of the island. And once through the Pali, we'll hug the coastline to our destination. En route, we pass Kāneʻohe Bay and next a tiny island known as Chinaman's Hat, a familiar landmark hereabouts and certainly quite picturesque. Nearby at Laia is the Church College of Hawaii, established by the Mormon Church, and at the edge of the campus is located the Mormon Temple of the state. Now, as we shall see, the students at the college play a very important part in maintaining the colorful Polynesian village. But first, listen to college president Dr. Owen J. Cook.
We have many fine Polynesian students from New Zealand, the Fiji Islands, Tonga, Tahiti, Samoa, and the Hawaiian Islands, who have a great desire for a higher education. However, most of these students do not have the financial support to pay their college expenses.
Well, thanks primarily to vacationers like us, fine young people such as these from all over Polynesia are able to meet their college expenses. All right, our bus has arrived, and we're at the 15-acre Cultural Center, although hereafter we'll refer to it as the Polynesian Village. Now, from the outside, there's no indication of the size, beauty, and charm of this village. But once inside the entrance, we begin to understand why the village is the talk of the islands. That small tram for visitors is just about the only sign of civilization. Otherwise, the atmosphere is truly authentic. Coconut palms, thatched huts, tiki idols, yes, and even papaya trees. Now, as I said earlier, there are 6 separate villages in this one area, and the first village awaiting us is Tahiti. In this authentic setting, you don't have to try hard to make believe that you are actually in Tahiti. In fact, this is what Tahiti was like only a few decades ago. The youngsters playing by the lagoon are Tahitian, and here are some of their mothers, weaving hats of straw from dried pandanus leaves. The pandanus, incidentally, is virtually the universal weaving material of Polynesia. As for the hats, well, not bad at all, and quite inexpensive should you choose to buy one. The hatband is made of small seashells. While the women weave and chatter away, Pierre Kamitata shows us how he carves, as did his ancestors for centuries before him, the Tahitian tiki. His carving tools are simple but authentic, a crude mallet and a hand-forged chisel. But the finished work needs no apology. Miss Nawalani Webster is attractive, intelligent, and a student at the Church College. After classes, she comes to the village to be fitted for a new dancing costume made for her by Siapo Fisagno. The wardrobe mistress is Christina Noahi, and she supervises wardrobe for all the girl performers at the village. Nawalani Webster is quite at home in this atmosphere, for she is Tahitian-Hawaiian and not someone imported from Hollywood. Well, they start 'em young in Tahiti, and the same rule applies at the Polynesian Village. Just watch these little scene stealers. As you look back on just part of the Tahiti village and realize that there are still 5 villages to see, Hawaii will be next, you can't help feeling amazed at how much has been done with so little land. Just 15 acres. But it seems more like 200. But 15 acres is a lot of walking, so we took to the tram, driven by Miss Juanita Chang of Hawaii.
Aloha, welcome to the Hawaiian Village. In the distance of approximately 50 feet, we have traveled from the islands of Tahiti to the Hawaiian Islands. In reality, a distance of about 2,500 miles. My name is Juanita, and I am a Hawaiian. We are standing in the typical village setting that we would find during the reign of King Kamehameha I.
Kele Lokana has no compunctions about having her picture taken, which happens about 1,000 times a day. Here she cleans and rolls luhala leaves used for thatching the roofs of the huts. Inside one of the huts, we saw a marvelous example of Hawaiian quilt work performed by Malika Khan. The Hawaiians were taught to sew by missionaries, geometric patterns mostly, which the Hawaiians did not like. Instead, they prefer the softer designs, which may be taken from the shape of leaves or shadows on the ground, etc. And incidentally, a quilt such as this requires 4 months of handwork. One exhibit leads to another, but we can't bypass Hawaii's answer to the Tahitian Hula. I'm sure you recognize Nawalani filling in for one of the other Hawaiian dancers. The Maoris of New Zealand are another universally respected Polynesian people. Millie Tinayo is typical of the attractive, soft-spoken, well-spoken Maori women. Now listen as this gracious lady interprets the meaning of these Maori panels.
Well, Jack, these tuku-tuku panels are done by our women. They were very fond of putting their feelings or thoughts into a design and putting them onto panel work. Now, these stitches here represents their menfolk at war. And these stitches represents their mother's eyes. And these stitches represents their falling teardrops. So therefore, we named this design the Takitoru Roimata, which means the falling teardrop pattern. Now, we have what we call our kia here. It grows in the forest, and we harvest them a certain time of the year. And of course, we boil them with the bark of a pino tree, and it bleaches, and that's also natural. And this is where we use them in this design. Now, this design we call the potama. It's a very authentic design in our Maori culture. And of course, you can see the design looks like steps or stairways. But we call this, the history here, it's the stairway to the stars or stairway to eternities. That's the star pattern there. And of course, this is how it's been used.
There is meaning to the Maori mat panels, meaning in the carvings that decorate their longhouses, and yes, there is meaning to the hand-carved popo, which are often used as columns for their buildings. Flatter and more intricately carved than the Tahitian tiki, the popo also tells a story, generally of a man's ancestors. The Maori stick dance also has an ancient meaning, tribute to the earth god. What an exotic, far-sounding word it is, and what a village the native Tongans have to remind them of home. But even in Tonga, there's more to life than sunshine and freshwater lagoons. There's work to be done, and much of a woman's work consists of making tapa cloth. The bark of the hiapo bush, similar to the mulberry bush, is soaked overnight, then pounded and pounded until finally a slender piece of softened bark is flattened to incredible dimensions, in this case, almost 2 feet wide. Individual strips are then sewn or pasted together, then painted or dyed with results such as this. The Tongans, when they're not working, are as happy and gay as any people we've ever seen. And if there isn't a song and dance to fit a sunny occasion, they'll make up a whole routine. This, however, is a traditional tune and dance, which translates to mean pretty girl. The Samoa village seemed bigger to us than some of the others, but regardless of that, we and our fellow tourists saw much worth photographing, and by now I'm sure this pretty Samoan miss has learned just the right way to say cheese. The Samoan canoe, Ali, is much more sturdy in construction than the average outrigger, and it had to be, for in the old days it was the only form of transportation from one island to another. I don't know which of the Polynesian races invented this method of climbing a tree, but it's agreed that we copied the idea many centuries later. And we asked this lad what would happen if he fell while reaching for the coconuts, and with simple dignity he replied, "Sir, I think I would be very embarrassed." These Polynesians have a wonderful sense of humor. This old method of husking and cracking a coconut is obsolete. Nowadays, a machete does the job a lot faster, but notice how with just a small sharp stone, he neatly trims the top. The milk of the nut is a delicious drink, and especially when it's free. A barbecue pit or imu just a few feet away was the scene of much activity, and these Samoan lads were scooping up the roasted yams and slabs of roasted pig wrapped in leaves. Well, by this time, we were as hungry as vacationers can be, and we were directed to this longhouse where a big feast was ours for the asking. While we dined, Mr. David Hanneman described the entire Polynesian menu.
This is the Polynesian pupu, held in the Samoan guest house, and this is the food that we serve from the 6 villages represented here. Now here in my front of me is the Fijian corned beef with taro leaves. They call it in Fijian Pulamaga Roro. From Tonga, we have the kumara, or sweet potato, and also the sweet Tongan pineapple, as you see here. And from Maori, we serve you the taro, and from Tahiti, raw fish with various vegetables such as cucumber and tomatoes, and chicken and long rice, and papaya pudding, or poi as they call it in Tahiti. From Hawaii, we serve you the famous kalua pig, roast pork, and the Hawaiian poi. Now all this food from these 6 different villages are served on the coconut platter of the ma'ilo. The idea is that after dinner we just throw the whole thing away. We don't need to wash them.
Well, it's not an original idea, but it's always worth re-examination. No dinner dishes to wash, just throw the whole setting away. Put it down on your list, the longhouse at the Samoan village. Fiji, the 6th of the villages in this American Polynesia, sounds distant, remote, and relatively uncivilized. The Fijian Kava ceremony was not performed only for our cameras. You too can see it when you tour the Polynesian village. The man in the white shirt portrays the guest of honor in a typical Fijian house. Kava is the juice of a shrub, the roots of which are first dried, then powdered and mixed with water. This Kava ceremony of welcome is a solemn ritual punctuated by an occasional outburst of measured hand clapping. The kava juice is non-alcoholic, but it does have a somewhat narcotic effect.
Mother!
Nights a week, the college students, their parents, and other Polynesians at the center stage a musical review entitled Isles of Paradise. And all who have seen this thrilling production have called it the finest as well as biggest Polynesian musical show ever presented anywhere. Harry White, a Tongan student at the Church College, operates one of the giant floodlights. Gus Forsythe, Hawaiian-Samoan, is responsible for the music and recorded sound effects. And Jack King, also a Tongan student at the college, is the master electrician for the show. Now, each of these 6 villages performs on stage for 20 minutes for a dazzling 2-hour outdoor spectacular. And these are merely a few excerpts from the grand finale. The next morning, Harry White is forced out of slumber by his roommate, Jim Bassett. Working the lights at the big show in the village, he is now entitled to the education he has earned. There are books to be read, lectures to be heard, and chemistry tests to stimulate the imagination. And so we have seen some of the interesting people you will meet at the Polynesian Village. And we know why most of them are here in Hawaii, from all parts of the Pacific. But as to the village as a whole, one obvious question remains. Why was it created? How did it come into being? For the answers, we turn to Mr. Wendell B. Mendenhall, one of the leading directors of this enormous undertaking.
The Mormon Church has been in the Pacific for approximately 100 years. We have done considerable work with these people, understanding their habits, their language, their customs, and have learned considerable about their culture. We have seen their culture in its early stages. We have seen it of late years, and recently we have learned that this culture is fading rapidly into extinction. We have felt that it's important that the world understands something of this great Polynesian race. We began to study ways and means to develop a center which would take in all of the major Polynesian islands. This we have done. We have preserved their culture. It is quite authentic. We have shown the culture as it was. We have shown the culture as it is. We have the people in the village which show them as they are and as they were. And now we're showing them as they may become.
Nursing these 4 Tongan boys is Mr. Jack Regas, the director of the lavish Isles of Paradise show we saw a few moments ago. Now, the word rehearsal sounds out of place when associated with anything Polynesian, but listen to Jack Regas.
You know, all the students here at the Polynesian Cultural Center are a talented lot. It would be hard to distinguish which is the most, whether it be Samoan, Tahitian, Hawaiian, Fijian, or Maori. But this particular group, the Tongans, well, they had aspirations of doing more than just standing and being a vocal group. So they came to me and they said, Jack, would you help us with some staging and direction and choreography? I was delighted, and it's been a real joy because of their vitality and their unique way of singing. Now, what you see now is a rehearsal. When they really perform, it looks a little more like this.
Here means pretty girls. Here means lucky boy. I love you. Take it easy, bye bye, lemon. Take it easy, bye bye. Take it easy, bye bye. Take it easy, bye bye, lemon.
Our thanks to Mr. Regas, to Dr. Cook and Church College of Hawaii, and a special vote of thanks to the Polynesian Cultural Center. In my humble opinion, one of the most unique, most colorful, and most worthwhile tourist attractions on the face of the earth. Now until next week, Jack Douglas saying thank you so much and good night, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.